Today, Great.com talks with Debbie Edelstein, who is the Executive Director of Native Plant Trust. If you have not heard of them, they are the nation's first plant conservation organization built to promote New England's native plants and ensure healthy, biologically diverse landscapes. If you're new here to the podcast, please press subscribe on YouTube and your podcast app, because today we are going to learn what are native plants and why they are so important to local cities and states. Miss Debbie, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me today.
Of course. I wanted to start, those that have listened to the podcast, I know you mentioned you grabbed a few episodes beforehand. I have this sort of rule, and maybe I'm the only host that does this. I'm not sure. But anytime I interview someone that's been with an organization for more than 10 years, I feel like I have to start not at the organization level, but at the individual level. At that point, I feel like you're not doing it for monetary value. You're not doing it for like selfish reasons. I personally have been with the same organization for about 6.5 years, and it is a haul. You deal with some things. It's hard to stay, most people struggle to stay married 10 years, and you've been with the same organization 12 plus. That's where I want to start, is just tell me a bit about who you are and why you do what you do.
Well, I do what I do to save the world, right? And to make the world a better place, and to make sure that I leave it better than I found it. I got into this was, it's a long political story, but let's just go back a little bit. I changed at age 40. I went back to graduate school and changed careers. I'd been in communications. I was a writer and an editor, and I had kind of done what I wanted to do there. And I wanted to go save the world. And so I went back to graduate school and went to MIT and got a degree in environmental planning. And really thought that the way I could make a difference was by healing nature as best we can. We've done, hundreds of years of damage to the planet. And I think the IPCC report today tells us how much damage we've done and what could I do to heal it. So it was really about being a good steward of the planet. And the only way to get the kind of work that I wanted to do was to go back and get a graduate degree and start all over in new fields, And to tell you that changing careers at age 40, when you go out into the job market, people kind of look at you and go, huh? Like, you're a grown-up professional, but you're new in this field. What am I supposed to do with you? So the answer to that was to go off to, a small organization that basically was all volunteer and only had one person running, who was the executive director, and they were just happy to have my skills, right? So that was the way. To do this. And since then I've actually worked on. I'm kind of a generalist. I mean, that was a watershed organization, and then I went to the nation's oldest land trust, which is the trustees of reservations here in Massachusetts. Did a whole save the 15,000 acre bioreserve project, then went to National Audubon and was a vice president of National Audubon. Then I went to air quality, and now I'm plants, and plants are really the most important.
Yeah, I love the first grab of like, I felt like I was underskilled. So I went to a role that only, there's only one person there, very tiny. That's I think that benefits you in so many ways. One, they're like, we're tiny enough, we'll take you, come on in, right? Like, we'll take anybody almost. But also, when you go into an org that's smaller, that's lean, you have to get scrappy, and you start to go into other verticals, and you start to build expertise and marketing and in sales. And, you mentioned offline, you're a bit of an introvert, and you have to start learning how to talk to people. And like, there's many skills that you start to sharpen when you go to a smaller organization like that, right? They start to stretch you outside of the typical responsibilities. So that's
really true. I had also been self-employed for a decade before I went to grad.
You totally get it.
I was used to that part of it. But it was really interesting to go from small organization to then a fairly large one, about 100 employees, then to Audubon with 7,000 employees. I mean, it was really, and I realized that the smaller to mid-sized organizations were the right place. And also, I'm a constitutionally bad employee in the sense that I want to take control and be the boss. So it helps to have finally grown up enough to be the boss.
Yeah. Native Plant Trust. Give me your elevator pitch, if you will. I mean, what do you guys do? Talk to me about it.
Well, Native Plant Trust, the name's pretty descriptive, and we just changed the name, I have to point out. We have kind of three-legged stool, like most conservation organizations. We're founded by a bunch of botanists, and so we do conservation, field work. We're the seed bank for New England for rare and endangered plants. We have a horticulture program, including the botanic garden and a native plant nursery. And we have an education program that does 200 programs a year, really in-depth programs. They're really for adults, right? Serious programs for adults. So we're kind of a three-legged stool, but, and different people know us for different things. Mm-hmm. Really internationally for both our conservation work and for the garden. This is a native plant garden, and it's at a time when there weren't native plant gardens. This was founded. But as a conservation organization, it's where we really sort of punch above our weight, to use old metaphors. We've because we were founded in 1900, right? We've been around for a really long time, and we've been the pioneer of a lot of things that other organizations have picked up. Mm. Modeled, and we continue to innovate, and we're science nerds at heart, right? And so we have a sort of team of botanists who do field work, who do research. I mean, we do the arcane kind of research like taxonomy, right? And also really cool research like restoration projects. So, our research botanist did the big comprehensive technical manual of the flora of New England, right? The first update in 60 years. And we have a team of people who've been restoring the summit of Cadillac Mountain in Acadia National Park. We've been working on that for 5 years. So, it's the whole range of things, right? We have 1,500 volunteers who monitor rare and endangered plant populations in every county of New England, and they've been doing it for 30 years. And then we have the botanic garden, native plant nursery, education program. So it's a lot of things. And our conservation program, we've consciously aligned it in the last few years with the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation, which is part of the Convention on Biological Diversity. And we have been accomplishing the targets. They're countrywide targets, but we've been accomplishing them for New England. The U.S. is not a signatory to the Convention on Biological Diversity for all kinds of weird political reasons. So the U.S. does not have to document, or in fact, Congress used to prohibit the country from documenting its progress towards treaties it doesn't sign on to. But we've been making great progress. And we just, for instance, issued literally a June 22nd, after 3 years of work, issued a giant report with the Nature Conservancy on how do you meet 30 by 30 goals, the new goals that have taken over, and the Global Strategy for Plant Conservation. If you want to save plant diversity in New England, what land, where do you have to protect? Mm. Exactly, down to the parcel level. What land, where do you have to protect? And so that's the kind of work we do on the conservation side.
Yeah, there's a bit to unpack. In fact, I'm going to try to go back and double click a couple of those. I wanted to start with in my introduction. I think I said something like, what are native plants? I know that is a broad question. In fact, coming in, I typed in like, what are Texas native plants? What are Houston native plants? And I'm trying to figure out like, what am I looking for? I want to start with that is like, I want to ask, what are they? But really my follow-up question is like, why should people care?
Why should people care? Well, what they are, I mean, there's a very long, complicated scientific definition, right? Shorthand in the US, we typically refer to native plants as the plants that were here before the colonists arrived, before the Europeans arrived, right? That they were native here. They're the functioning ecosystems, the plants that were the anchors of functioning ecosystems before Europeans arrived on this continent. Now, you could say the glaciers pushed a whole bunch of stuff into different regions, and that's true. But between the time the glaciers receded and the time Europeans arrived, that's kind of the time frame that people use to define native plants, native to wherever you are. There's also naturalized plants, ones that have been here long enough to actually be functioning in the ecosystem, but we're not quote unquote native. Why they matter is that they're the base of the food chain. One of the things I have come to say when I talk to other environmental groups is that everybody talks about habitat, but nobody tells you it's plants. Right? It's plants. That plants are the expression of soil and slope and elevation and the way the sunlight hits and how much water a place gets. Plant communities are the expression of that. And that's what makes them rooted in place, right? They belong to that soil, that temperature, that slope, that elevation, and they form communities. And insects, starting with insects and everything else, depend on that set of plants for their sustenance and their shelter and for their reproduction. So that's why they matter, because all of these things evolved together over millennia, and you start breaking it apart and you see what we get, right? You get worldwide insect collapse. And by the way, insect pollinated plants are also collapsing, no surprise. A little bit of symbiotic relationship there. So that's why they matter. Will what's native change over time? Yes. As things become naturalized, they then become sort of native over time, right? They function in the ecosystem the same way, or at least function well within the ecosystem, do no harm within the ecosystem. So, it's a flexible definition over time, but,
Yeah, I mean, why, as I said it, or as you describe it, it sounds silly. I mean, I know it's an important question. Why do they matter? But if you draw, and I cannot believe I cannot remember the name of this diagram, but, when we're children, as we go through school, we all drew this diagram of grass to insects, insects to a snake to a, right. And you saw like the kill chain at the very bottom of that, the base, the very foundation, that is plants, right? Like, so as this changes and if you lose certain populations or things move, that affects the rest of the ecosystem. Everything up chain is affected by what happens at the very bottom.
Absolutely. And you can even see it in climate signals, right? So plant flowering times have changed because of warming climate. It depends upon where you are in the planet, of course. And now they may be blooming out of sync with bird migration. So if they bloom out of sync with bird migration, the insects are also out of sync with bird migration, and birds eat insects and they also use nectar from plants. And so there's been this shift, right? Or you see, if you're in the eastern part of the anywhere in the United States, but in the eastern part of the United States, the hemlocks are dying, right? There's a little bug and also a scale fungus kind of thing that's killing all the hemlocks. So that's a whole majestic part of our ecosystem, just like when we lost the chestnut trees, or just like when we lost the elm trees. And that will change things, Of our national parks are here in the East. We don't have very many national parks in the East. But Acadia, for instance, is losing some of its pine species. So things will change. It's not necessarily going to be catastrophic. If we talk, again, if we put it in the climate change framework, which is, given the IPCC's report today, probably a good thing to do. Things will change. Plant communities will come apart and come back together. Some species will thrive, some will die out, some will migrate, right? And change is always present in ecosystems, but it's accelerated because of obviously the man-made changes between destruction of habitat and fragmentation and all of the other man-made things. And now you've got climate change. So the change is always happening, but we're in some places going to hit some tipping points.
Yeah.
Themselves can't sustain themselves.
This is an awesome segue into, there's a question I highlighted in front of me that I highlighted it blue just to make sure, do not miss this question. I grabbed a quote from your website. Let me read that. Native plants are facing the greatest wave of threats since the last mass extinction. And I think you've talked through a few sort of man-made problems. I think we talked about some climate issues. I just want to ask you, talk me through some of these major threats. We're facing the greatest wave of threats since the last mass extinction. Talk me through some of these major threats. What are we facing?
Well, we're actually predicting, worldwide, they're predicting about 50% of plants to, if not disappear, be severely severely affected by climate change because of rain shifts, right? And water shifts regimes, which are the two main things that they rely on, apart from the soil. So the threats, when we did our State of the Plants report a few years back, we found that for every plant community, there were roughly 5 threats affecting every one of them, whether it was development, pollution, trampling, right, from uses, invasive plants or other invasive species, just a lot of deer populations. The explosion of deer populations is because people aren't hunting, right? So, I mean, there are all kinds of things, but plants were already facing 5 big threats, right? And you'll see it, like 80% of the salt marshes on Cape Cod are gone, right? And the rest of them are imperiled, right? So we're seeing a lot of threats. It's really scary to look at what's happening to plant communities and therefore individual plants as well. And climate change is just in some sense, just the big unknown. I mean, we can see the changes already on the ground, right? And as one of the botanists around here likes to joke, in the last great period of warming, which lasted 400 years, oaks did not take over Vermont. They didn't move northward. They just adapted in place, right? And some species will do that. Some will move, some will stay and just adapt, some will die out. But unless we start changing our development patterns, right? Unless we save the right places, because right now it's the right places. We have 100 plus years of land conservation in New England, and our report asked the question. We've saved 8.5 million acres here. If New England's small, we've saved, have we saved enough in the right places to ensure plant diversity? And the answer is no, because you also have to look at climate resilient land. So if you're Maine and you're bedrock, most of what you've saved is already on climate resilient land because, it's bedrock. If you're Rhode Island, which is sand and silt, you're going to have a hard time saving things.
Sure.
So it really is a combination of what have we done? What have we built? Where have we built it? What have we channelized? We've got 10,000 rivers in New England, 10,000 rivers that are dammed,
Wow.
10,000 dams, right? That changes the vegetation around them, right?
Sure.
So what have we done? What do we need to do to save plant diversity? Because without plant diversity, you have no biodiversity. And so that's the real critical thing at the moment.
Almost as if, and I did not share my notes with you, almost as if you're reading from my notes. That's what I wanted to say next is, okay, so we've talked a little bit about the challenge. Now I think the listener, the next best question is, well, what are you doing about it? And I know you rattled off at the top a few success stories. Can you share about maybe some of the things you're currently running, some of the plays you're currently running, and maybe even some of the past successes, some of the plays you've executed on?
Well, I think we're doing things in 3 levels, right? Because we have 3, right? One people. Right. So, learn about plants because not all green things are created equal. Right. So go learn about plants. And we have our GoBotany website, which is the flora of all of the plants in New England. And it will teach you how to identify them and learn about them. So we have a lot of programs and they've all been online for the last year. So, people all over the country have been taking them. So we have that. I want to speak for a second about horticulture because, of course, this is where most people interact with plants. If they're not out hiking in the woods, they've got gardens, or they see gardens, or they visit gardens, or their town has planted spaces. Horticulture can have a really positive impact. Back when I was at National Audubon, the Audubon at Home program the guy who ran Audubon at Home at the time used to say, if everybody planted native plants in their backyard, you'd have a continental scale restoration program for birds. And so if you think about that, and Audubon still talks about birds, I mean, obviously talks about birds, so does the Nature Conservancy, so does everybody else. They talk about birds and they talk about plants and the connection between them. And you can plant native plants in your gardens, right? You don't have to rip out what you've got, but add native plants. I have an entire native, and I've never gardened in my life because I've been a city girl, but I bought a house out here in the suburbs. And so, in the rural actually, and I put in a 100-foot long garden and all with native plants that I bought from our nursery. And the place is filled with the birds and butterflies and bees and wasps and dragonflies and everything. You can plant native plants and plant seed-grown ones grown without pesticides. The pesticides will kill the insects, which you don't want to do. And seed-grown preserves the genetic diversity. So the nursery industry clones plants, right? So the plant that you buy at your big box store or even your local garden center was cloned somewhere in Tennessee from a plant from who knows where. And it may look like it's a native to your region, that is, you got those kinds of plants there, but it really isn't. And it's a clone. So you put clone plants across the landscape, across the country, and you're impoverishing the genetic diversity of the landscape. And pest comes through, this will be like the old potato famine. If a pest comes through, it's going to wipe them all out. So you want that genetic diversity from having seed-grown plants, from sustainably sourced wild seeds. So you're getting all that genetic diversity and enriching your landscape.
I love that. Heavy education arm, which we've talked about the GoBotany program. We've talked about this other branch of like the DIY for a listener or a user that's there in the area, like being able to go to you guys, educate you themselves, and then also buy true bred plants, native bred plants there from within the region. Anything else, the conservation arm? I mean, just any other programs or plays or success stories or anything cool wins that we can share here before I keep pushing on. I do want to ask a little bit about, if someone were to start their own garden, where could they start? But any other, you've been there a while, any other fun plays or wins that you're just very excited about anytime you get the chance to toot your horn? I want to give you that chance.
Well, I mean, I do want to direct people to GoBotany. Because this was a big thing, right? We spent a decade doing the new flora of New England, right? And because we had it, we were able to get this lovely, huge NSF grant it took 4 years to put GoBotany together. It has 30,000 images. It has all 3,500 plants. There are 148 characteristics of the plants behind it. It's a geek heaven, right? For things. But what was important about it was NSF, when they gave us that grant, also gave a grant to the Smithsonian at the same time. And because they've noticed that botanical education in the United States has been on a decade-long decline. It's disappearing from universities. Nobody's teaching it anymore, right? And for every biologist in federal service, every wildlife biologist, there are 20 wildlife biologists for every botanist in federal service. And all the state and federal botanists are at retirement age. So where was the pipeline going to come from? Well, they thought if we could use some online tools, we could get people interested in botany, and maybe they would make careers out of it. So NSF funded us, and they funded Smithsonian to develop LeafSnap, the app LeafSnap, which uses face recognition software to identify trees. That was where it started. And we talked to them. We gave them all of our oak information, actually. Nice. And the point was to see whether or not you could use these tools to engage people, right? And to get them to understand about the plants around them, and maybe to do citizen science, which is what LeafSnap was about, or in our case, just to teach people.
Sure.
Right? We train teachers. And ours is customizable. So the Concord Museum was doing an exhibit, a Walden Pond Thoreau kind of exhibit, and they wanted to use GoBotany with their school kids. And the town of Concord has an inventory. So we were able to check box in the back end of the database and do a customized one just for the town of Concord, Mass. And the little kids came out, and the staff wanted to teach them how to use the program and the iPad, and they're like, we got this, go away. Right? And it was great, right? If people are really using it. And all the conservation commissions use it. I mean, whenever we go anywhere and we say how many people have used GoBotany, well, 6 million people have used GoBotany. So
wow.
So one of the things we do is we put out a lot of tools for other people to use, whether it's professionals or whether it's the general public. And that's an important function of what we do. I mean, people may care less about us doing genetic analysis of seeds, but we think it's important, but
Sounds cool.
Yeah. Well, one of the things is we started the programs of monitoring. I mean, again, we have the oldest volunteer program in the country for monitoring rare and endangered plants. We have more than 30 years worth of data on the rare plant populations in New England. And we seed bank them, right? So that we can use them in restoration projects. And also just for posterity, if we need to have that genetic diversity, then we've got it in the seed bank. Yeah.
The GoBotany program sounds super impressive. I mean, now we've double clicked on that, maybe triple click. Where could a listener go find that and see what you've built? Do you mind sharing the webpage? And we'll obviously have it linked, but do you know
I think it's just GoBotany. GoBotany /
native plant trust.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. I'm
looking
if you
type it in, it'll come right up.
Exactly. Yeah. GoBotany.nativeplanttrust.org. I will, I'll make sure that we have that linked in the show notes, but that's a lot of information, years of work compressed down to just a few clicks. I love sites like this. That's super cool.
We also, we're an organization with 27 staff members. We also publish books all the time. Right. So we published a wildflower guide to New England. Again, the first 4-color wildflower guide to New England in a really long time. We published a book called Native Plants for New England Gardens. Again, a kind of primer for people wanting to use native plants. We've got another book coming out next year on, again, sort of native plants for your garden. So there's a lot of resources for people, and that's an important part of what we do.
Yeah. Let's say someone tunes in, and I'm going to kind of pick up on the question I was getting ready to ask earlier. They tune in, they hear you guys sell the native plants. They know there's lots of education there, and they're sort of motivated. You put in 100-foot garden in your place. It's like, you know what? I'm going to get this thing going. Do you have any recommendations on types of plants or where they could start? I know that's a very broad question. We're talking to people all over the US and globe, but maybe for your region specifically, or maybe just broad, like only start with greens or flowers. I don't know. Any just generic tips of like ways to get started or easier things to raise? I'm just kind of getting your take.
Well, I think no matter where you are, start with plants from where you are. Right? Because they're going to need less work on your part. So find whoever in your region or your town, in your region sells plants that are native to your region. Find the garden club people who know about them, because a lot of the garden clubs do, or your local botanic garden might have a native plant garden and somebody's got a native plant nursery.
Real quick, and I'm sorry to interrupt. I think that's an awesome point, what you said at the beginning. If you just start with where you are. I think so many people start with like, I'm going to plant roses or tulips, or that, like there's very cookie cutter squared sort of, let's put this in the garden, and people really struggle to get those things to life and to grow and have. I guess it's an interesting thought coming from someone that's not gardening or raising plants. I just think that's a really, really good point. It's so obvious, but it's a really good point. Start local.
Well, it is. So I've never gardened in my life. I come from the side of things, right? And I got a pollinator kit from us, which was 50 plants, plug size, right? They're just barely, right? And I actually got one from Vermont because we didn't have any more. And I bought some actual retail size plants. Put them in the ground, like read the directions, put them in the ground. And basically I haven't had to do anything since except take out the weeds, acknowledge that the bunnies are going to eat them. I'm there to feed the pollinators. I can't begrudge the bunnies. Yeah. Literally, if you're planting plants that are literally sourced from your area, they will, yes, you can kill them. Of course you can kill them. You can put them in the wrong soil, or you could put a plant that likes the shade in the sun.
Sure.
But, look at its growing conditions and put it where it wants to be, and it will be fine. And if it's a kind of a locally grown one, locally sourced from your area, it should like your soil pretty much. It will like your weather, and it will do fine, and you won't have to do much to it.
That's
roses are really, really hard. I understand.
that is a pro tip. I know it's so obvious coming from yours. It's like one of those things. you've been doing something for so long. There are things that you implement that you're like, of course, everybody does this. But you saying that, I'm like, oh, of course, start locally, of course. Let's say someone else tuning in has another, you're turning on light bulbs for them like you have for me. And they're like, I want to get started. I know we've given them the GoBotany program. We've given them that website. What other ways could they get involved with your program, what you have going on? You're educating them. You're also running plays. How could they get involved?
Well, one way they can get involved is by taking our classes, right? Because, at this point, more than 50% of them are still online, right? And we have some basic foundational, Plants 101 and Plants 102 classes. We have Designing with Native Plants online courses. Our course certificate programs are going online. So there's a lot of really deep content as well as kind of fun content that's online or in person if you're anywhere near New England, because we teach the courses in all 6 states when we're allowed to travel to those states. So that's one way to get engaged. I think the other thing is just learn about plants and get active in your own community. I mean, right? This report that we just did with the Nature Conservancy is a roadmap for every single land trust and every single town and every single state and federal agency about where to focus your conservation efforts in order to save plants. So you literally, it goes from the regional scale to the parcel scale on the interactive map, which is on our website. And you can scale down to the parcel level. You can scale down to your town and say, what needs to be saved in my town to save plant diversity, and then go talk to your town, right? And your local land trust. Now, if you're in New England, we've got 435 land trusts just in our little region, but there are land trusts everywhere, right? And your town and towns save conservation land and state agencies do. So one of the things you can do is be an advocate, right? Wherever you are, you can be an advocate for saving plants and therefore saving biodiversity and making sure that conservation dollars are spent most effectively. Now, from my point of view, that's saving plants, right? Not necessarily saving everything, right? But you want to spend those limited dollars effectively. And the other thing everybody can do is get involved in whatever effort there is locally that's dealing with invasive plants.
I make sure that we have everything linked here. I just wanted to echo, first, I really appreciate everything you've shared today. This was really, really good.
Thank you.
I think that
I don't do this very often. So.
You come off like a professional. Yeah, thank you. I think you made several great points today, and I just wanted to emphasize one, go check out, you've done so much research. Your organization's done so much research. We will make sure that many of the resources that we've discussed today, including the interactive map, are hyperlinked in the show notes. Check that out. And then there are so many free resources, both at your website and locally. My stepmother here in Crosby in Houston, where I'm at, is a part of a gardening club that's like 130, 150 people within her community. It's like 3 or 4 neighborhoods that have gotten together, and they're able to talk about plants that are successful and that, ways they're having success in just a 4 neighborhood group. These are all over the place. And so if this has sparked your interest, your curiosity, if you feel like you need to have an impact or get involved, this is a very easy moving way. Please. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say almost everywhere in the United States, there's a botanic garden nearby. And a lot of botanic gardens are also have conservation departments. Right. So go to your local botanic garden and find out what they're doing. They will also be offering classes, right, on gardening classes. They may also have some conservation programs if you're really interested, if you get interested in the conservation side of organizations. But this country is full of really beautiful and wonderful botanic gardens. And most of them have at least a native plant section. Not all of them are about native plants. Obviously, we're one of the few there's a handful of us that are exclusively about native plants. But but most of them have native plant sections, for sure. And you can go there and learn about the plants that are native to your region that you probably see every day, but don't pay any attention to. But you can go learn about them. And you can also learn about the bad guys. You can learn about the invasive plants. You can learn about the invasive pests and pathogens, right? That are, about 30% of the plants in the United States are not native to the United States. That's fine as long as they're not invasive. and about 10% of them are invasive, and they will, destroy all the native plants and choke out waterways and things like that. But you can go learn about them. There are resources all around you. So if you're not, if you're in New England, we'd love you to pay attention. As again, people are taking our online courses from all over the country and even sometimes outside the country. But but there are resources also where you live. There are native plant societies, garden clubs, botanic gardens.
Awesome. Steffi, this was fantastic. I appreciate your time. Thank you for doing this.
This is a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah. For those of you that are listening, if you enjoyed this episode, please press subscribe on your YouTube or podcast app. This will show the algorithm that this is an important conversation, so more people can learn about the importance of a healthy ecosystem and what it takes to actively promote and protect your own garden. Steffi, thank you.